Welcome to today's webinar, Getting to Yes with the U.S., Reinventing the Currently Tense U.S.-Canada Relationship. We'll kick off the discussion with an interview of our guest, Bill Jones, and then open up, inviting your input. But before Bill, some have asked me why we even dare discuss this topic, giving airtime to the insult of Canada becoming the 51st state. Why? Why indeed? Well, I'll quote a phrase from Alexander Pope's poem of 1711, over 300 years ago. And he said, quote, "A little learning is a dangerous thing. A shallow draught intoxicates the brain. Drinking deep sobers us again. So let's drink deep and sober up. The US president sneezed and Canada's got pneumonia." Welcome, Bill. Bill Jones, I trust everyone can see Bill. And as a management consultant, Bill, and a founder of Altamont Group, you've helped governments and businesses fix things like their economies. You're a well-traveled multinational consultant with an interest in the economy and history. Your article in our newsletter last week about what the U.S. is really up to was illuminating. The pending threat of the U.S. imposing tariffs on Canada was the sneeze. The pneumonia, hair on fire, harebrained politicians and media seemingly in a panic. So for starters, Bill, where are we? Saturday's D-Day. How did this pandemic start?
Well, thank you very much, Perry, for inviting me to have a talk with you. The pandemic started, we have to go back a little bit in history. There was a worldwide move to the globalist agenda, open borders, pan-national states, etc. And up until Trump's first presidency and his Make America Great Again, interrupted that for 4 years. But he was stymied with his own political mess that was surrounded him. And he was very ineffective in moving away from the globalist agenda. Biden came in and exaggerated the globalist agenda. We just have to look at the Mexican immigration. I'm not saying Mexico, but Latin America immigration through Mexico. And the other policies that the Biden administrator put in to forward the globalist agenda. I don't believe anybody thought Trump would make the comeback that he did. And it has caught everybody by surprise, including Canada. Canada is a very globalist, through our government and Prime Minister, globalist agenda policies that he's put in the government. Our immigration is very high, and he's preached very much the pan-national state. He doesn't even know if Canada is a real country himself. So Trump, in his background, and just to be clear, he did not create this policy. He's the axle on the wheel that's driving it. And to sum it up, it's called Fortress America. It's a new Monroe Doctrine, to be short on that. And that is, America is becoming more isolationist. They're withdrawing from the world and focusing very significantly on their own security and their own economics without the world involvement. And Canada's been caught short-footed. I don't believe our policymakers anticipated MAGA and Fortress America to come back. And we're betting on the continuation of globalist policies. So Canada's been flat-footed. And I think that's where the panic is. All the plans within our infrastructure of government was based on the status quo pre-Trump. Trump has thrown a huge monkey wrench and a hand grenade into all of that worldwide. We take a look at Colombia, where a mere threat overturned a Colombian policy in less than 24 hours. So it's power politics by Trump, and I do not see the leadership inside Canada in dealing with Trump.
You're going to see, Bill, in the course of my chat with you, that I'm not going to refer to Trump very often. I'll refer to the United States. I mean, he is the president of the United States, and as such, in negotiations and in media discussion, he is the voice of the Americans. So I will refer to the United States more frequently than I will to Trump, because then you get into personalities in the person, and I know it's hard to avoid.
That is a major part of what's going on. And a quote that I read today sums it up perfectly. The press take Donald Trump's words literally, but do not think he's serious.
Oh.
You should take Trump. His words are not serious, but you should take him serious.
What do you think then are the expressed concerns of the United States? We've heard, but they're speculative. What are its real objectives? You talk about fortress North America. I think you're starting to get into something called the defense. But give me a little bit more color on what you think the primary objectives are.
So it's Fortress America, which is the United States. So historically, since the end of the Second World War, the United States has guarded the world as the world's policeman, and most importantly, the shipping lanes on a global basis with their massive US Navy. And that has allowed other countries not to have to invest in their own navies to protect the merchant fleets like in the 1800s or 1700s. And that has been a huge explosion in global trade and to the prosperity of all countries all over the world other than the United States. The United States didn't charge anyone for this service. They did it on their own dime, and they did not really benefit. They created a global competitors, Germany, Japan, Europe, Canada, with their goods and services. The Americans can no longer afford this. They're running out of their own economy. The United States is going to retract, not by desire, but by need, to concentrate on the United States. And you can see that. They're driving all the industry and productive capabilities, finance, et cetera, back into the country. And then they're going to block off the rest of the world. They've got the Navy, no one else does. Too bad for everyone else. And we can all say, well, we don't have to trade with the US, we can trade with the world. Well, what Navy, Army, and Air Force do you have to protect those fleets? None. Are you going to depend on the EU, China, Taiwan? There's nothing out there. And that's a huge risk to the rest of the world. The United States does not need anyone. And when I say need, it's very particular. They certainly benefit from everyone, but push come to shove, they don't need anyone. Sure, their prices will rise. Sure, it will be harder than otherwise, but they don't need anyone. But the world needs the United States.
If this fortress, as we refer to it, I presume that includes Mexico, but for the sake of this discussion, we're focused on Canada. Canada's concern right now in this fortress is its loss of sovereignty. Now, according to surveys, it's not something most Americans seem to want either. But Canada sees this as a threat. Trump poses it, as a suitor might, as an opportunity. Is this a joke, a threat, or an opportunity, or all of the above?
It's power politics. The administration that's in power right now in the United States is trying to modify Canada's globalist policies. So, as I said, it's Fortress America, and you're correct. That's the United States. No one else. Couldn't care less. It is in Canada's benefit to make it Fortress North America, including Mexico, which is, again, you can see in his aggravation of Greenland. He wants to protect the northeast and the south from Mexico and lock up the North American continent and basically ignore the rest of the world. So, but he can do without everyone. So I think it was a shot across the bow to start the conversation of his plan for Fortress North America. And what does that mean? That means we have to unify our policies, our foreign affairs, and our trade agreements so that North America becomes more like the EU, where the transfer of goods is unhindered by a line in the sand called the border. And that would create the Fortress North America. Now, obviously, if we were all one big country, problem solved. But that's not going to happen. So he's driving home to Canada. You've got to get your act together and join me or get left out in the cold, quite literally.
Okay, while you say it's not going to happen, let's speculate for a moment. Would there be any benefits of statehood for Canada and or its provinces and territories? I mean, maybe it's not 51, maybe it's up to 62. Off the cuff, there's defense, there's Senate seats, which I question whether we really have them now. And finally, free market access. Is there more? What would be the benefits if someone really wants to get into a discussion? And Alberta certainly had that discussion, but do you want to speculate at all on or comment at all on what the benefits actually of statehood would be?
I'm really challenged by that. There is nothing that statehood would grant us that we cannot do by treaty. So free markets, treaty. In our own house, we can get control of our own finances, healthcare, military, etc. That's our responsibility. We are leaning on the United States right now, but we can pick up our own socks on that point. But quite frankly, there's no direct significant benefit joining the United States that we don't already have or cannot expand by better trade and better treaties and better relationships.
Okay, well, I'll come back to the silver lining in a minute. I mean, the silver lining appears to be that this overture is forcing Canada to take a look at some of the issues which we have right here in Canada, and it may be triggering action which has been lingering for ages and going unresolved. Maybe we have, as I say, a silver lining in here, and someone having triggered this discussion in Canada, looking at itself on what it needs to become a stronger entity and enter into a more balanced partnership. The U.S. prime concern right now appears to be the trade imbalance, with punishing tariffs imposed for correcting this imbalance. And whether the imbalance is 200 billion, as he claims, or 20 billion, as others say, the imbalance is of concern. And truth hardly matters here. What is negotiable? You know, sober me up.
So first of all, you're absolutely right. It's focused Canada to focus on Canadian issues. For example, we pay roughly 23% more on our internal trade goods within the provinces versus the United States, where that percentage is 3. We trade more freely with the United States north-south than we do east-west. That's a travesty. What is the point of confederation in organizing within the Canadian system? Economically, there's no such thing as trade imbalance. People trade. I trade you a cup and you give me coffee. If we insert the dollar bill in between, that doesn't change exactly what we're doing. So what we're doing, to the great benefit of the United States, is we're shipping our real commodities and real products in return for their paper dollars. If you really look at a trade deficit, that's the deficit you want. I print out paper dollars, give it to you, and you give me real goods. So I find it very ridiculous that we concern ourselves about trade deficits in the beginning, in any way.
Well,
Second, he does not allocate the benefit of Canadian products, which we sell to the US at a significant discount. It is Canada that's keeping his gas prices low. And he doesn't add that into his calculations. If we sold at global rates, it would go up $1.50 to $2. And that would be a significant hit on his economy. So he is not an economist. He's a populist.
He claims that the U.S. is subsidizing Canada. It almost sounds like it's actually the opposite, with lower priced goods. You know, we're shipping lumber, we're shipping energy, whether it be hydro or oil or gas, we're shipping agricultural products. We may even in the future be shipping water at a reduced price. So who's subsidizing who? That's another point of contention.
You're absolutely right. The calculation is so upside down, it's ridiculous. But Trump is a businessman, not an economist. He doesn't understand these things. And he looks at the bottom line and he thinks sending US dollars to Canada is somehow subsidizing Canada. Doesn't make any sense, and it is his weak spot. However, he's using tariffs as a political power play, and not necessarily an economic.
Okay, well, let's shift gears now and take a look at the border, because there is a border issue, not just this balance of trade issue. This border between Canada and the United States, the one that defines that boundary, is the world's longest international border and also one of the few undefended. It's not something Canadians worry very much about. That border seems to be more of concern to him or the US than it is to Canada. The US border to Canadians up until late has been defined, well, by most Americans as where the climate changes. Now, where I'm going to go here is a bit tongue-in-cheek. Canada to many in the US is where the winter weather originates. Canada to many Americans is hardly habitable. Canada's weather has been its defense, cheap and effective. The Arctic remains undefended and few migrants move north from the US. The US is concerned with the 1% flow of fentanyl going south. Canada's concern is the 100% of gun runners from the US. So how serious is the border security issue? Canada traffic into the US of concern is but a smidgen of the cross-border migrants and fentanyl. Your turn. You want to jump in on this one?
Yeah, you're absolutely correct. It's, in my opinion, and reading behind the scenes with what Donald Trump and his policies and his new doctrine, it is a point for both North and South to break the border line. And to do that, he's gone the other way to make border the major issue. Now, the border with Mexico is a significant issue, and it's going to be for a few generations due to Mexico being transparent to the Latin American immigration. There's not much they can do about it unless the American troops move to the south of Mexico. But in Canada, he's attempting to, once again, undermine the globalist agendas of our current administration and governments with the mass immigration into Canada. He sees that as a concern coming from the north, not so much that we are currently moving lots of stuff across the border, but the threat of the hundreds of thousands of people a year that are coming into Canada, pretty much open-ended, and them migrating to the United States. And I think that's his biggest risk. Remember, the United States and this current doctrine is stability and security, and mass immigration is a huge destabilizing effect. So I think he's swinging the bat widely at Mexico, and I think we got hit on the backswing.
Well, it sounds like the Monroe document is being updated and including very specifics that relate to Canada. I'm going to come back to a point we made earlier, and that is that there may be a silver lining to his threat. It's taken the US president to trigger in Canada a serious look at our issues, such as interprovincial trade, which you referenced earlier, when it's easier to trade north-south than it is east-west or west-east. We cited several issues in Sunday's newsletter, and I'll refer to them. The issues of supply chain management, which prevail in the dairy industry, the responsibilities to NATO, the restoring of merit versus woke ideologies, the addressing of corruption, particularly in procurement, the concern regarding China's influence and whether or not we're too tolerant in Canada versus the US is primary concern, the issue of corporate subsidies, the standards of living that differentiate between the two countries, the energy transition, which seems to be underway, maybe more or less, maybe with government intervention or not, the issue of border security we touched on, and of course, sovereignty overall. So there's a number of issues out there that Canada may well be better in terms of being ready to address now that Trump has attempted to bully us around, and recognize if the politicians will take advantage of that, we've got a silver lining in all this. You want to elaborate?
Oh, I completely agree. And I think that was the actual goal, though offered indirectly through all these other issues that he's created with his tariffs, et cetera. And that is Canada's opportunity to review what we do internally and the tremendous mess that our confederation is sitting in. The big challenge, and I don't know if I'm leaping ahead to one of your questions, is Canada's knee-jerk reaction to attempt to hit back will be a tremendous disaster. The only thing that they're going to hit back with is Alberta's economy and our oil shipments. It is the only thing that's massive enough to get the Americans woken up, let's say. And it looks like, I just read the news article, that Donald Trump is considering excluding our oil imports in the United States.
Elaborate on that. I hadn't seen that.
Yes, so it's just a dialogue that he's thinking about a carve out for the oil shipments into the United States.
Well, that will be clearly divisive.
It will be massively divisive. And that will trigger the Ottawa government to use oil as the weapon against the United States.
Let's come back to that during the Q&A. I mean, Alan Warwick is with us, and Alan was with the Lougheed government when Trudeau's father initiated NEP. So we're back to the Trudeau dynasty's appetite for oil, and Trump apparently is aware of that. And if he plays that card, or we play that card inadvertently or intentionally, we're playing right into their hands. So Jordan Peterson on Wednesday, by the way, summarized in the National Post Canada's lingering weaknesses and the inherent East-West, Quebec and the rest conflicts impeding any resolution. And I'll read it to you. Trump is threatening the integrity of Canada, and very effectively. The fact of that threat and of its effectiveness might make us think twice, which is the point we're making now. In such thinking, there could be the opportunity to shed the idiocy that is making us poor, weak, and irrelevant on the international stage, and contemptible to our neighbors. We could make this saber rattling into an opportunity, increasing our cross-border trade, getting out of our own way on energy front, rekindling our national pride, at least to the point where we regard our country as both viable and valuable, seek the international markets that would make us more truly independent as a country, strengthen our commitment to the military that would be increasingly and truly necessary if such independence was to be pursued, and make the next 100 years of Canada triumphant instead of the story of its contemptible, self-aggrandizing, moralistic, falsely green, and socialistic demise. Seems like Jordan Peterson has some emotions woven in there, but I think that, in a way, that's what we've been summarizing today, and I'll thank Jordan for having listened to us.
Yes, indeed.
So, are there any other points that you want to make? We're getting into that 5 minutes of wrap up, and I would like to keep this to a half hour, but are there points you'd like to make here, Bill?
Well, this is a grand opportunity for Canada. It is absolutely necessary for us to join Fortress in North America. The United States can cut us off and they won't blink an eye, and Canada would be doomed, fatally doomed. We cannot support our country in its formation without the United States, regardless of what people say about going international. We get to ship to the United States on highways, short, close, convenient. Shipping internationally, long, costly, with ships without a navy. So it is in a desperate time to, as much as we all can, to influence our governments and the leaders in government to wake up to what Donald Trump is actually trying to do for North America and join. Open borders for trade and get our own trade situation going, and Donald Trump will be very happy. A little bit of organization of mutual policies on the international stage is necessary as well. But he's not after Canadian sovereignty. He just wants Canada to join Fortress North America. And if we don't, he'll shrug his shoulders, cut the ties, fence the wall, and we'll freeze to death.
The issue, it appears to me, to simplify it, is one of people misinterpreting the word joining. You seem to be taking a position not unlike that of Daniel Smith, who appears to be the only sober politician in the bunch from a negotiating point of view, not panicking, but proposing negotiable options in the pursuit of a win-win option. Why is Alberta the exception? Well, I think we know why. Is negotiating really an option? And I think you've said yes. I'm going to leave that with the audience when we get to the Q&A from the viewers. But finally, we have 48 hours to D-Day. Care to forecast what happens at midnight on Friday?
Um, well, that's a great question. About 24 hours ago, I could give you a more firm answer. But given that he's considering a chop out of the oil pipeline or the oil exports into the United States, it is really, really dangerous for Canada.
But this is fascinating, Bill, because if in fact that's the position that he takes, he says, okay, I'm prepared to negotiate, but I'm gonna exclude Alberta. The hair on fire politicians in the rest of this country will go ballistic.
That is correct.
So we will have at midnight this Friday. It's Canada that should be. We need to wake up to what is Canada going to do at that point? We've talked about what Ford is heading the Federation meetings. Danielle's going to either be brought into the room or not.
Yes, exactly. The power of Canada sits in the east, the economy is in the west. We cannot expect that the federal governments will not support their own political base and will throw the economy into a tailspin, including Alberta, without a blink of an eye. And that's reality. So I would expect that Canada will put excise taxes on the oil, raise the prices regardless of Trump's cutout, and go head to head with a lightweight to a heavyweight boxer, and he's just going to punch the lights out. And he doesn't care. Our only hope, and unfortunately it was said earlier, I don't know if it's March or May, that the next election is going to happen. The only possible way out is if the Poilievre government gets in place. And perhaps Poilievre can restart the relationship with Trump. But boy, that's a long ways away.
Well, we have seen some waking up in Canada in the last week. I have heard more sympathy to an east-west pipeline. I have seen more of an awareness that the things that Canada should have been doing, that it may well be doing, although you can't do that in the short term, but a recognition of the role that energy, particularly the oil and gas industry here in Alberta or in the West, can play in unifying and building this country to strengthen it in this North American fortress. So I'm going to leave it at that, Bill. Say thank you. Don't go away. I'm sure in the follow-up discussion, you'll be called on again. Peter, you had your hand up.
Thank you, Perry, and excellent overview on your situation as you described it there, Bill. Mike, I have a comment, and it's really well, maybe I guess it's more of a question. It started as a comment to myself, and now I guess it's a question. I mean, I point out that I put it in the chat. Canada is already a member of things like NATO, NORAD, the Five Eyes, various other organizations that are integrated with the United States, and they are integrated with us. So why does Trump need Canada as a state? I mean, the main thing I see is it's about defense. It's about security. We've had this relationship through the Cold War where Canada would have been the battleground. So we built the NORAD defense line, the Mid-Canada, NORAD, the DO line, the Mid-Canada line. These things were built to anticipate the Soviets coming over with their bombers initially and then missiles. Why does he need Canada as a state of the country, of America now? We've already had always agreements in defense, always agreements in security. We've often sometimes turned down things America wanted us to do, like going into Iraq, but that was a choice. And I don't think it had anything to do with Trump's current view. So I'm just pose that as an open question. I'm not sure whether Bill will I be able to answer it or anyone else, actually, but it's clearly a problem.
We're zeroing here in on defense specifically, and Canada seems to be very weak in terms of taking defense seriously, maybe because it's got the weather as a defense, but 1.5% versus 2% or 3 or 5 is clearly understating the position that's expected of Canada to play as a defensive role in NATO itself. But Bill, do you want to add anything here, or anyone else want to chime in to Peter's comment about why is Trump taking why is he taking this so seriously?
So great comment and great observation. However, we have to now take a step back. All those organizations are entanglements on an international scale. And We've already seen that Trump is threatening to leave NATO. He's already dropped out of the WHO. It's very likely he's going to start dropping out of all these international organizations and focus on the United States. So even though Five Eyes and other things are vital to the United States international security, they're now a backdrop to the internal security of the United States and the stability that they demand. So Five Eyes will not be so necessary if the United States does not need to police the world. They won't care what happens in India or China. Let them solve it out their own. You know, early 1900s United States, pre-World War I. So they'll just let the rest of the world burn. They'll sit comfy in their little homes, and reader won't care about what's happening. That's not saying the United States will be unable to act. They'll still be the big boy in the world, and they can go anywhere and bully and push around anyone they want, but it'll be very much more considered simply because they can't afford doing that on trivial things as they have in the past.
So Bill, and Peter both, I would say that if I was in the United States and I looked at Canada today, I don't think the US thinks that Canada is taking its borders all that seriously. It has done virtually nothing to protect its northern border. And I had discussions with Joe Clark 20 years ago about what concerned the Niagara Peninsula, or the Laurentian group. And it was border security in the north, which we've done nothing. When you look at the development of the Northwest Territories, this huge expanse of land in the boreal forest, we've done nothing to develop our the north, either for defense or as an economic engine for North America. The Mackenzie River, the longest river system in North America, longer than the Missouri, longer than the Mississippi, unless they're brought together. We have resources and the capacity in the north that has remained undeveloped. If I was in the United States looking, as I was in third grade looking at a map on Long Island and seeing Canada one time and asking the teacher, what was that? And she showed me these lines of wheat, meat, fiber, timber, oil, and gas coming in from the north to the south. Why is that not ours, as a third grader might ask? But Canada has ignored its north, either for defense or economically. And it would seem to me the US would drool over being able to play a role with us to defend the north as well as to further develop it.
Correct. That's exactly what he's
Okay.
trying.
Peter, any comment there?
I wouldn't say that Canada has ignored development of its north and also defense of its north, but it's been at the low end budget level. And I used to work for the Polar Continental Shelf Project. That organization was established by an act of parliament in the late 1950s when the first Law of the Sea conference happened, and a Canadian delegation, the leader of that delegation, came back to the government and said to Parliament that if we do not do something about our north, we will lose it to the Soviets or the Americans. And so within 18 months, the government took action and created an organization called the Polar Continental Shelf Project. It was a multidisciplinary scientific effort to send people to the north to explore and claim this is part of Canada. And we've also, of course, built, both with respect to military as well as intelligence, the alert base. And more recently, we've established a further military presence in the far north, but it's still, again, at low budget level. And to me, our investments in northern protection shouldn't be in F-35s, unless, of course, the United States takes over Greenland and we can use Thule. But they should be in drones. Anyway, that's my comment for your question there, Perry.
I'm not sure that Russia or China are trembling as a product of Canada's defense of the North, but I'll leave it at that. I mean, I spent a number of years consulting up in the North. What Russia has done in Siberia far outstrips anything that we've done.
Absolutely.
So I'll leave
Mind
it
you, that what Russia's done, most of Siberia is taiga, as opposed to the Canadian north, far north, the islands, Northwest Passage, north of that, very barren lands.
Okay, Anita, your turn.
I just want to address this issue about fentanyl going from Canada to the US. And you know, it seems like US is talking a lot about fentanyl. And in Canada, we go, why are they getting so upset about this? Because isn't it a very small amount? You know, and in fact, U.S. Custom Border Protection said, I think, and I'm not sure when they quoted this number, but it was 19.5 kilograms were seized at the border versus, 9,000 plus kilograms at the Mexico border. However, I'm going to just point out that in the last 3 months in Canadian newspapers, there's been memos about the RCMP in Metro Vancouver, and this is in October 2024. Metro Vancouver, so it was Surrey and also in Kamloops, 54 kilograms of fentanyl were seized and 30 tons of precursor chemicals seized. In November, outside of Edmonton, 7 kilograms of fentanyl were seized, and we didn't get a number about the precursor chemicals. And just January 28th, so what was that, 2 days ago, a fentanyl super lab in southern Alberta was discovered, or the people were charged. 31 kilograms of fentanyl. This is pure fentanyl, processed pure fentanyl, and 7,600 kilograms of precursor chemicals. So clearly Canada is manufacturing lots of fentanyl because this is just a small snapshot. And I think we do a disservice if we don't listen to what is really concerning to the Americans when they say, we don't like all the fentanyl coming across because you guys do not have a well-monitored border. So yes, there is some fentanyl being apprehended. However, most of it is undefended. So clearly lots of fentanyl is getting across. And what's lots? I don't know. This is 100 kilograms, just a snapshot of what was being manufactured. And these labs were up and running for a while. And is that all across the country? So, I think Daniel Smith was coming out and saying, well, we're going to really try and monitor what's going on here. But yeah, we are being dismissive of some of their concerns, and we're not even paying attention to our own data. So I think I heard that there was an interview with Kelly Craft, who was a former ambassador of the U.S. to Canada and one of the lead negotiators of the USMCA agreement. And she was very clear about, our unmonitored border and the fentanyl going across. And then, the Canadian interviewer said, yeah, but what about all these guns coming in from the States? And she says, my point exactly. If you had a better monitoring, you'd be preventing some of that.
Anita, this is exceptional. I mean, the phrase that comes to mind is where there's smoke, there's fire. And whether or not we are intercepting the fentanyl going across the border is not really the issue. We're producing that much. It's going someplace. And if it's not going there now, someday it would be going. So I think you made an excellent point, which tends to get ignored. I mean, when I said 1% versus what percent is going over the Mexican border, that's not the point. The fact is, it appears that we're not monitoring adequately and that we're producing way more of a good that shouldn't be exported anywhere. It should be Canadians protecting Canadians from fentanyl. That's my issue. Go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah, thanks, Perry and Bill. It's excellent comments. With regard to Anita's comments, I suspect that we're seeing a lot more fentanyl in the news now because it's become an issue thanks to Trump. And so maybe the police are focusing on doing something about it. But even the several hundred kilograms that you're talking about, that's like one cocaine shipment coming from Colombia or something on a submarine, right? Anyways, the interprovincial trade, we can thank Trump for waking us up to those issues, and hopefully that will change and we'll be able to reduce these barriers that we have. With the United States withdrawing from the World, the WHO, I wonder if that's going to be a a big deal, and it would be nice to, I mean, it's definitely going to be a big deal, but it might make things better overall. Who knows, in terms of international participation and coming together and helping to solve some of these issues. It'd be nice to see them withdraw from the World Economic, or not World Economic Forum, what's the
WEF.
yeah, I was thinking, yeah, Trump had some interesting comments at the WEF as well. I was thinking of the World Trade Organization, because they seem to be in favor of the United States most of the time at our expense. But going back to his previous administration, you know, he opened up the NAFTA agreement, and we ended up with USMCA. And the biggest thing that I see changing there was just the name of it, because most of the stuff stayed the same. It was just a big show, as far as I can tell. A few minor changes were made. But it was still a slap in the face when, despite all those negotiations, the United States still had tariffs on Canadian steel and Canadian aluminum. And the talk of him invading Greenland, it's kind of, you know, unbelievable, because the Danes have bent over backwards over the years to allow the US to have military bases in there. The only reason that he could want to have Greenland would be as a grab for resources, to enrich American companies. And by the way, they probably have access to the resources up there if they're willing to invest, like they've said they wanted to invest in Canada under Biden. So who knows? There's currently a program to update NORAD and a competition going on from the Canadian Armed Forces to build up infrastructure in the Arctic. And that's something that I'm quite interested in. I'm even going to submit some ideas for that. But anyway, all of the things that that we've been discussing, it seems like it's a whole bunch of smoke and mirrors. I'm not sure what his end game is. But, you know, in the end of it, Canada has been a great partner to the United States. The United States has been a great partner to Canada over the years. And all of the bases that the United States operates around the world, you know, they've gone in, essentially, instead of going into Panama and taking it over and creating a whole bunch of belligerents who want to fight the United States, they've got access to the Panama Canal. They've got preferential access. Their military can use it on a priority basis, and that's the way it is with the bases they have around the world. And what Trump is doing is he's kind of poisoning the water and creating opposition in the local populations. That's
Let me pick up on that. It would seem to me that one of the things that we're learning is Canada has been in denial on a number of its weaknesses, and you alluded to it earlier, that what this discussion or negotiation or confrontation is achieving is a recognition we've got issues. And that what the objective appears to be from Bill's perspective, and certainly my own as reflected in our newsletters, is achieving a position where integration feels comfortable. Instead of living next to our neighbor with an anti-American perspective, which prevails across this country. I mean, this hair on fire mentality has got to stop. I mean, neighbors on both sides of the border need to wake up to the fact that we are neighbors, and as such, goodwill ought to be the prevailing motive. But I'm going to call on Alan here and have Alan challenge this whole damn discussion. Alan was in cabinet in Alberta back in the 70s, at a time when I was within the government as well. So I know Alan. He certainly knew Peter Lougheed. He was in his fraternity. That was a different time, a different era. But when I listen to Danielle and I think about Peter, I see a twin. Alan, do you want to add anything here?
I welcome the opportunity to express the nature of the attitude to begin with in our time in the 1970s. It's can do. Let's partner. Let's get it done instead of the endless whining that we hear. We have got so much capacity and so much opportunity. The United States is a huge market to invest in, to sell to, and we ignore all that while everybody bitches and whines, just like Ottawa.
You know, it's interesting, Ellen, when we get into discussions with Canadians about the US-Canada relationship, the first thing that comes up is healthcare. And yet we have waiting lists that are unconscionable, as if we will define the adequacy of our healthcare system by comparison with the US. What a foolish argument. We have a problem with our healthcare system. If Trump has acknowledged there may be benefits from a working relationship that they may have from some of the things that they would learn from us. But it seems to me that healthcare is just another issue that we have internally that we have failed to address. Denial seems to be the name of the game. We seem to, in Canada, have a problem with conflict, internal conflict as well as international conflict. We want to be seen as nice and peace givers. What we're being challenged is, do we stand for anything?
That's a really good question. I will say that in where I live, which is in Edmonton, it's born in Calgary, so I cheer for the Oilers anyway. But I have had medical treatment second to absolutely nothing here in Edmonton. And I'm sure it's the same thing in Calgary where I was born. But we don't have it universally across this province in the rural areas and so on. And boy, that's the place we got to get better at to serve those people and all their generations to come.
Well, the health.
There are spots of excellence in Alberta.
Yeah, no, I'm personally experiencing the value of continuous care or continuing care or home care. It's phenomenal, and it doesn't cost anything. And yet in the U.S., it can soak your savings. But I don't want to get distracted into healthcare, but it certainly is an issue where we need to look at it from our own perspective, not relative to what the U.S. does. Greg, collaboration is the name of your game. We're talking about negotiations and finding a win-win. It seems to me collaboration is the very essence of what we're discussing. Anything you want to add here, either complimenting or otherwise?
I think we have to go with where Alan was. We have to go back to can do. We're taking such a Canadian-centric conversation here. Trump doesn't give a rat's ass about Canada or any other country that imports goods or services or finished products into the United States. He's talking about having the External Revenue Service set up to tax anyone that imports. He's saying, come and invest in our country. We'll put our arms around you. You choose not to invest in our country, we're going to tax you. Teddy Roosevelt 2.0. So it's Fortress USA. Let's not even confuse it with the word America. Fortress USA, and that leaves Canada on the outside. And if I were Trump, the next round, 6 to 18 months from now, would be, let's continue to weaken Canada so they'll have no choice but to join us in one.
Bill's perspective was somewhat different. Bill talked about Fortress North America. Is U.S. standing alone? That's different than what I heard Bill saying. Bill, do you want to jump in here?
That's right. So the policy is Fortress America, but he's much more, there's better stability and security for Fortress North America, which includes Mexico. And that also explains the aggravation on the Panama Canal. It isn't so much that he wants to open it up for US shipping. He wants it so he can close down shipping. He blocks the east-west trade through the Panama Canal. Everybody's got to go around the very terrible South Africa and South Africa. So again, that's what his lockup is. Take out Mexico, Panama Canal, Canada, Greenland, the United States, fence it all off. The rest of the world could go to hell as far as he'd be concerned.
Okay, Peter, you got your hand up.
Yes, I was just going to add that I think that one of the major things that Trump has that he hasn't talked about in his arguments about Canada becoming part of America is actually a desire to have access and control of the Northwest Passage.
Yeah.
So in fact, I could see an agreement. I don't know how many of you remember the history here, but when Canada and the US were setting their border, primarily the 49th parallel, there was a great debate in the United States about 54-40 or fight.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, the U.S. people at the time, not necessarily the government, but lobbyists, were very keen on the border being set at 54 degrees, 40 minutes north. Well, it was set at 49 degrees north. I'm arguing that Trump wants everything north of 5440.
Yeah.
Because that's all the Northwest Passage and the open opportunities in the transit of both
Look,
commercial traffic as well as defense.
The Northwest Passage has become a strategic route. I mean, for years, the Northwest Passage was unachievable. Now, with global warming, it is being viewed as a strategic pathway
Yes.
for others. And I think Trump sees that.
Well, there are two passages. There are two shipping passageways through the Arctic without crossing through the North Pole with the ice is still there. Right. So one is the Eastern Passage, which is the passage that travels across Siberia, north of Siberia. That's been open water now for several years, right, even in the summertime and even longer season. The Northwest Passage is starting to show tendency to be open for longer periods of time, as well as the sea ice on the ocean itself is thinning and becoming mushy. So it's clear there'll probably be two major routes through the Arctic Ocean, both hugging the coastlines, one hugging the coastline of Asia, Eurasia, and the other the coastline of North America. But I think this is what Trump wants, and that's why he's arguing Greenland as well.
Yeah. Well, we need to better appreciate the relevance of Canada as more than just that ribbon along the border. We have a huge expanse of land with huge amounts of wealth sitting in the north that have gone unrecognized and undeveloped. That I did a study some years ago when I was managing partner with KPMG of dredging the 6 impediments to the Mackenzie River becoming an import force to Hay River. But it only required access to the Arctic, and we now have access to the Arctic. So the whole economic development of the North is understated, not just for defense, but for economic development. I'm looking to see if anyone who hasn't spoken yet wishes to make a point, make a comment, share with us an observation. Paul Conway, you had a comment to make here. Is there anything you want to elaborate on?
Man, it's interesting being here in Ontario and watching Doug Ford, play Captain Canada. When you consider that both Smith and Ford are kind of populist premiers, it's interesting how diametrically opposed their approaches are on this. So, so I watch with interest. I can't offer any particular wisdom other than rough waters ahead. And thanks for engaging us all in this conversation.
Well, what you've done, Paul, and I thank you for joining us today, is my introductory comments about drinking deep and becoming sober again is, if more Canadians are listening to what's going on today, they're becoming much wiser about who is Canada.